Alright, so we've completed the chapter on photosynthesis, and next up we will begin talking about homeostasis. Now, the chapter of homeostasis is sort of, as far as the Edexcel is concerned, it's in parts across different chapters of the book. In the Cambridge book, it's all in one chapter. The chunk of it that is part of the syllabus. So the introductory information about what homeostasis is and how it works in principle, as far as the Edexcel is concerned, is chapter 7b/6. Rewrite that with a bit of space in between. 7b/6, homeostasis. Right, introduction. Now, what is homeostasis? Homeo means same, and stasis means keeping. Right? So keeping things the same, which basically, right, is the term used for the regulatory mechanisms or responses of the body that maintain, right, they maintain the internal environment of the body. That is what homeostasis is. Now, how does it work? So, right, the body has receptors that are able to detect changes in both the external and internal environment. And sort of, instead of saying changes, let's say stimuli. So something happened, it's a stimulus. Stimuli for plural, stimulus for singular. Right, from both the external and internal environment. Right, now, changes in the external environment can have an effect on the internal environment, right, and so that would cause a change, a homeostatic change. Right, now what happens is, when the stimulus is received, and let's talk about the stimulus being received from an internal change. A signal is sent from the receptor to the control center. Which is basically the brain, right? The head honcho of the body. and that signal is processed, and then the brain sends a signal to what is called an effector. Right, the effector can be muscles or glands, right? And the effector, what it does, it brings about a change, an opposite change. So, right, to review this again in a different way, right, and with an example which is relevant, right? For example, the water concentration, right, the osmotic potential of your blood has increased. Okay, which basically means you had too much water to drink in most cases, unless there's a disease which is causing water to be retained in the body. That would be a different case, but right, so you had too much water to drink, and it could be water, it could be juice, it could be soda, anything with water in it. So there's a lot of water in your blood now, and the body needs to maintain the concentration of water in the blood. So that change, that increase is in this case detected by the pituitary gland, which happens to be in the brain itself. In fact, by the hypothalamus. Which is in the brain. And the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which in turn sends a signal, right, releases a hormone called anti-diuretic hormone. And I'm giving this as an example because we will be talking about osmoregulation in detail. The anti-diuretic hormone, which goes to the kidneys, and the kidneys in this case are the effectors. And what the kidneys do is that they, filter out more urine. So they filter out more water, and so more urine is produced. Right, and so the osmotic potential of blood goes back to normal. Right, so the stimulus being received is the increased osmotic potential of the blood. The signal is sent from the receptor to the control center. In this case, they're both in the brain, so the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are both in the brain themselves, so it's not a signal being sent from somewhere else. There are scenarios like that as well. For example, the control of the level of glucose in the blood is detected by the pancreas, and so the liver is also involved, and so a signal is sent to the brain, which then sends a signal back, and then the hormones insulin or glucagon, depending on the scenario, are released to make it right. So yeah, so in this case a hormone is released from the pituitary gland, the antidiuretic hormone, and the kidneys are the effectors, and then those bring about an opposite change, so they reduce the osmotic potential of the blood. Alright. Now this kind of response is called negative feedback. Why is it called negative feedback? Because a stimulus, which is basically a change in the level of a factor, right, brings about a reaction to return the level of said factor to normal or near normal. Right now, this normal that we're talking about in biological systems, the normal is not it's theoretically a fixed point, right? The normal is called the set point, right? And so this is the theoretical normal value of a factor. But in reality, the level of that factor is constantly changing. So if, for example, right, this is the set point, right, the level of the factor will keep fluctuating around the set point. So if it increases, it will be decreased. If it decreases, it will be increased, right? And so it doesn't stay at one level, right? And so it fluctuates between two extremes of high and low under normal conditions. Okay, we're not talking about abnormal conditions such as disease or stress or something. And so, right, generally there is an average range that is considered normal. For example, the internal body temperature of human beings, right? We say, oh, 37 degrees centigrade, but it's actually somewhere between 36.5, I believe, 36.4 and 37.6. to 37.6. So there's like a 1.2 degrees range between which the internal temperature can fluctuate, and if it's falling within that range, it is considered normal. Okay, it's fine. Alright, so the set point is the average perhaps of that. Okay, and the values, because what the negative feedback does, it does the opposite. Right, so if the value has increased, like we talked about the increased osmotic potential, then it will bring about a decrease, and the decrease doesn't happen, right, only till the set point. It actually goes a bit further, and they're like, oh, okay, it went down, so bring it back up. And so they try to bring it back up, and they actually overshoot it, and so that's how it keeps working, and so that's why there's a range. Okay, is that concept clear?
Yes, sir.
Right, and so whatever, right, change is brought about is called a corrective action. Acha, there's positive feedback, there's negative feedback, there's also positive feedback. Right? Positive feedback is not something you normally have in biological systems, but there are certain examples. Now, outside of a biological system, positive feedback, if you've ever attended a function where someone's talking on the mic and you've got speakers and there's this sound that starts echoing, or this shrill sound like ching, or like that, and if you've ever experienced that, then that's positive feedback happening. What does that mean? So if the person's standing too close to the speaker and he's talking into the mic, so what's happening is when he's talking into the mic, his voice is being amplified by the speakers, and then the sound of the speakers is being detected by the mic again. So that amplified sound is detected by the mic, which is further amplified by the speaker, which is again detected by the mic, and so it just keeps getting louder and louder and louder. And so a positive feedback, so that a positive feedback is a sequential increase in a factor or situation, and so it just keeps looping and becoming larger and larger and larger. Now, in the Cambridge book, the example they've given is if you are inhaling air that is high in carbon dioxide. There's a high concentration of carbon dioxide. And so what happens when that goes into your lungs and there's gas exchange, there are receptors in the lungs that go like, oh well, there's too much carbon dioxide in the air that we're taking in, and so there's not enough oxygen for efficient gas exchange. And so what that does is that stimulates your body to take faster and deeper breaths. And that becomes a positive feedback loop. Why? Because the more of that air you're taking in, it's not helping, because the air is already rich in carbon dioxide, and so you're taking in more and more and more, and so the receptors are being stimulated constantly, and they're like, oh my god, this is a crisis, and you're so it's not controlling the situation, it's actually making it worse. Okay. In the Edexcel book, the example they've given is of labor, so childbirth. So what happens is the baby's head pushes down. Just a minute. So the baby's head pushes down onto the cervix, and what that does is it causes release of chemicals that cause uterine contractions. So contractions of the walls of the uterus, and those contractions push the baby baby, and that in turn causes more pressure on the cervix, because the baby is being pushed down, so the baby's head is pushing even more onto the cervix. Now this is a scenario that you want to happen because it's part of childbirth, obviously, right? So the baby needs to exit and be born, right? But an example of positive feedback, that something causes a reaction that makes more of that something happen. Now, what are the things, the different factors or features or systems in the body that are controlled by homeostasis? So, as we mentioned, temperature. So the internal temperature of the body is monitored and controlled via homeostasis, and we can understand why, because the majority of what's going on in the body is regulated, right? The reactions, or the building up of materials or breaking down of materials, repair processes, even the transcription of genes and translation into proteins are regulated by proteins, right? And some of those proteins are enzymes. So proteins are what run the show in the body, and they are temperature sensitive. We know that, especially enzymes. So if they don't have an optimum temperature to work at, their effectiveness will be lowered, and if there are extreme changes, then they could possibly become denatured, which is obviously not what we want, right? That will be very detrimental to the organism, to the body and the organism as a whole. Right, so you want to maintain body temperature. By the way, right, the optimum pH of the enzymes in the human body is actually 40 degrees centigrade, but for everything else 40 degrees centigrade is too high. So 37 degrees, we could call it a bargain. It's close enough for optimum activity. Right, we talked about water, right? So the water potential of the blood. Why do you want to regulate that? Because if it's too low, it will cause water to exit the cells and the tissue fluid into the blood, right? And that will affect metabolic processes. And if it's too much, then water will go into the cells, right? So the opposite. And because we're talking about animal cells, they will burst because they don't have a cell wall. So either case, not good. Then you have, right, blood glucose concentration. And so we can imagine, right, glucose is important for cellular respiration, and if the blood glucose concentration is low, right, cells don't have enough glucose for respiration, and so not enough energy. If it's too much, then that will, right, lower the osmotic or water potential of the blood, and then we can go back and see what would happen, right? So not good. So metabolic activities in either case would be disturbed. Blood pH. Alright, so the blood is just about neutral pH. And so are the cytoplasm of the cells. And just like with temperature, we know that proteins and enzymes, which are also proteins, are pH sensitive. There's an optimum pH at which they have the best activity, the highest rate of activity, and if it deviates higher or lower, then the activity would be reduced, and if there's too much of a deviation, then they would become denatured, and that is obviously detrimental. You're losing your proteins, and so whatever activity they were involved in, whatever process they were involved in, would be hindered or come to a complete stop. Other factors, right, such as control of levels of metabolic waste, and those include primarily in fact carbon dioxide and urea. Right, so the increase in concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood after you inhale, right, causes the gaseous exchange and then the exhalation. Right, so it's a stimulus, keeps that going. And I gave you the example of the positive feedback. Right, now that is positive feedback. It's not homeostasis. It doesn't help, but just goes to show that the concentration of carbon dioxide in your blood does have an effect, right? The body tries to get rid of it and tries to get it more oxygen. And in that particular situation that we talked about, it's not helping, but in general, right, it is a homeostatic response. And yeah, right, also we can, right, it's the concentration of oxygen. So coming back to the same point. Okay, am I missing anything? Right, so homeostatic mechanisms, right, are coordinated by two different systems. And the first is the endocrine system, which involves the release of hormones, and the other is the nervous system, right, which involves electrical signals or impulses. They're not independent. The nervous system is the main, as we saw, right? And the endocrine system may be may receive a stimulus directly, or it may be regulated. The signal might go to the nervous system first, and then the nervous system would send a signal to the endocrine system to release a hormone and to bring about a change, right? So in essence, the endocrine system is also under the control of the nervous system, right? It could receive direct stimuli as well, but the nervous system is the main controller, right? And as we know that hormones are, right, so hormones, let's talk about those. And at this point, right, as far as your Edexcel textbook is concerned, the chapter that we will be at is 7C1. And the name of the chapter is Homeostasis and Hormones. By the way, I haven't asked you in so long. Are you following along?
Yes, sir.
Any questions? Any questions?
No, sir, I can continue.
So chapter 7C1, right? Hormones. Now what are hormones? Hormones are chemicals messengers right, that are released into the blood, and they travel to their target, right, which is the effector, and bring about a response. Right, now hormones can be proteins, or they can be, right, steroid hormones, which is basically lipids. Right, so unlike enzymes, all enzymes are proteins. Not all hormones are proteins, right? Majority of them are, but there are some that are right, steroid hormones, and the steroid hormones are basically the sex hormones, right? So the testosterone for males and the estrogen and progesterone in females. And then the majority of the others that are proteins. And hormones are released from endocrine glands, right? So the glands that release them are endocrine glands, right? These are also called ductless glands. Why? Because unlike other glands that release enzymes or other materials into the body, for example, you've got the pancreas, which releases digestive enzymes, or right. So those are what are called exocrine glands, right? And they have ducts, or in fact, let me complete the definition of endocrine glands. So they are ductless glands that release hormones directly into the blood. So there are two things, right? They don't have ducts and they release the hormones directly into the blood. So both of this combination of features is what makes endocrine glands, right? And because they are going to release the hormones directly into the blood, right, the glands have a very rich supply of blood vessels, right? So there's lots of blood vessels around, and so when they secrete something, it diffuses into the blood and is transported where it needs to go. So I was talking about exocrine glands, right? Those are other glands that either have ducts, right, and or right their secretions are not indirectly into the blood. Let me rephrase that. Do not secrete directly into the blood. Alright, so for example, the saliva in your mouth comes from salivary glands. Right, so it's not going directly into the blood, it's coming into your mouth, so it's an exocrine gland. Right, so that's an example. Now there are a number of endocrine glands, and certain glands can act as both endocrine and exocrine glands. So an example of a gland being both endocrine and exocrine is the pancreas. Right? We know that the pancreas secretes digestive juices. So digestive enzymes, and that is its exocrine function. And it also secretes the hormones insulin and glucagon. So that is the endocrine function. And if you refer to the book, it gives you a list of different glands and what their roles are, so you can refer to that. I'm not going over all of them on the whiteboard. I'll just read them out. You've got the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus, we've come across those two guys. The thyroid gland, which is involved in controlling growth and metabolism. The parathyroid gland, the hormone it secretes is involved in homeostatic control of calcium metabolism. We just talked about the pancreas, right? And insulin and glucagon regulate the level of blood sugar in the body. You've got the adrenal glands that are situated above the kidneys that secrete adrenaline, which are involved in the fight or flight response, and they also secrete aldosterone, right, which is involved in the homeostatic control of osmotic balance of the body. Then you've got the kidneys, secrete a hormone that is involved in the production of red blood cells. Then you've got the ovaries that produce the female sex hormones, and the testes and the male, which produce the male sex hormones. Okay, and yeah, so right, I think I'll stop there. There is just a bit to cover, but unfortunately I have another class. Well, fortunate for me, I guess, and the student, unfortunately I have to end. So we'll talk about hormone release and how the pituitary is involved, and then how hormones bring about their effect. So when they reach their target cells, how do they act? We'll talk about that in our next class, which will be next week. And then we'll move on to osmoregulation. So the water potential of the blood that we talked about, the regulation of the water potential, we'll talk about that in more detail.
Okay.
Any questions?
No, sir.
Alright then. Do refer to the book, review your work, make notes of your own, right? Stay on top of everything so it doesn't feel like a burden later on.
Yeah.
Okay?
Sure.
Alright.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Not